The Nanhuang continent was very vast. If one gazed down from above, one could see that the Nanhuang continent looked like an irregular, oval-shaped chessboard that was surrounded by seas. It was separated by a boundless sea from the Huanggu continent and appeared more like an island. However, its area was very vast, and many people wouldn't be able to finish traversing it even if they used their entire life. It was just that the vast majority of the places there were difficult for the human race to enter. They were separated by the Truth Mountain range that ran obliquely through the entire Nanhuang continent. Moreover, there was an extremely vast forbidden zone in the southwest region of the Truth Mountain range. That place occupied almost 70% of the Nanhuang continent. Hence, only the northeast region of the Truth Mountain range had suitable places for the human race to stay in. But even so, the population of humans here wasn't small. In the northeast region, the minor and major cities were as densely packed as stars in the sky. There were sturdy ones and simple ones. However, these cities were all built while avoiding the small-scaled forbidden zones that could be seen everywhere in the northeast region. If there was a choice, no one would be willing to live in the surroundings of a forbidden zone. Staying there meant that one would constantly be in danger. Only outlaws would gather near there as a last resort. Their eyes were red with jealousy as they licked the edge of their blades while struggling to survive. Hence, scavenger camps were formed. In the surroundings of almost every forbidden zone, there would be such a campsite. From the perspective of the entire human race's territory, the location of the scavenger camps was very mixed. At this moment, such a campsite was perfectly reflected in Shu Qing's eyes as he stood on a mountain peak. By staring from afar, the campsite wasn't considered very large. There were merely several hundreds of people living there. Maybe it was due to the time being in the early morning. The smoke that arose from cooking was thick. Although this place wasn't as prosperous as a city, it was still very lively. There were sounds of shouting, insults, peddlers' trade, and even unbridled laughter mixing together. These sounds were then transmitted to a very far distance. For the valuable housing Captain Lei had been talking about, Shu Qing could see that ranging from the inner part of the campsite to the outer part. The structure of the houses grew increasingly simpler. The houses at the external perimeter were basically tents, and at a distance not far away behind the campsite, there was a pitch-black jungle. That place was shrouded by mist, as though it was hiding some terrifying existence. Even if the sky was filled with bright sunlight, the rays of the sun had no way to shine through there. It was as though there were gods and devils within, and they exuded cold intimidation in all directions. It looked like the black-colored mutation spots on the human body. It was a shocking sight, and at the same time, it was isolated from the other parts as well. "How do you feel after seeing it?" On the mountain peak, Captain Lei asked. "It's about the same as the slums." Shu Qing thought about it before answering honestly. Captain Lei smiled and didn't reply. He then continued to walk forward. Shu Qing retracted his gaze and followed behind Captain Lei. The two of them descended the mountain, and their distance to the campsite got nearer and nearer. On their way there, they encountered people in small teams of 2s and 3s who had exited or entered the campsite. Their clothes were all similar, and they mainly wore leather coats of a deep gray color. Shu Qing noticed that, after these people saw Captain Lei, they all revealed looks of reverence on their faces. The majority of their gazes also contained curiosity as they glanced at Shu Qing. This made Shu Qing have even more guesses about Captain Lei's identity. Just like this, when the sun was high in the sky, Shu Qing followed Captain Lei and entered the plains underneath the mountain. They then got to the scavenger campsite. The campsite had no walls, and the layout was very chaotic. Clouds of dust, withered leaves, and garbage could be seen everywhere, and there was a feeling of smog and miasma. As Shu Qing went deeper, the sounds he heard from the mountain also grew clearer as they entered Shu Qing's ears. What then entered his vision were numerous simple-looking buildings and a multitude of scavengers. Some were like broken ox, muscular and incomparably sturdy, but there were also skinny scavengers who had sinister and venomous gazes. A portion of them were old people who were so advanced in age that they could barely open their eyes, yet no one dared to antagonize them. Other than them, Shu Qing could see youths like him cowering in a corner and listlessly staring at the sky. A portion of them were cripples. All in all, there were plenty of people here. After Shu Qing saw them, his eyes narrowed slightly. He could sense spirit energy fluctuations from their auras. There were people of all shapes and sizes. Some were trading, some were sparring, and some were lying on large rocks and basking in the sun. Some had just hoisted their pants up as they walked out of the tents with brightly colored feathers on top. Their expressions were one of lust being satisfied. Shu Qing followed Captain Lei into the camp. From the perspective of an outsider, it was like walking into hell. However, other than the vigilance in his heart, he didn't wear any strange expression. In fact, he even felt a faint familiarity. Indeed, it resembles the slums a lot, Shu Qing mused in his heart. His gaze swept past those tents with feathers hanging on them, and he saw the scantily clad figures within. In fact, in one of the tents, a young woman even walked out half naked. She had a lazy expression on her face as she smiled and waved her hands at Shu Qing. "Don't look randomly." Captain Lei swept his gaze at Shu Qing. "I know what sort of place that is," answered Shu Qing as he retracted his gaze. The wrinkles on Captain Lei's face squeezed together into a half smile. He didn't say anything and continued to lead Shu Qing to the campsite until he arrived at his destination. That place was a gigantic building constructed from wood at the center of the camp. It was ring-shaped and appeared to be a coliseum for fighting beasts. On the way here, Shu Qing had been observing. In his mind, half of the map of this campsite had already formed. This was his habit. Many times, familiarity with the surroundings could become an advantage to aid one in resolving a crisis. At this moment, he lifted his head and looked at the coliseum-like building. He noticed that other than the gigantic field in the center, there were many crudely built tall chairs arranged around the field. Other than this, waves of roars from ferocious beasts could be heard from within the building. There were also rows of wooden sheds in the surroundings of the building. A few scavengers with clean clothes were faintly smiling and chatting outside the sheds. As Captain Lei arrived, a skinny middle-aged man soon walked out of the beast fight arena to greet him. This man's clothes were clearly different from scavengers. He had a three-stroke beard, and spirit energy fluctuations could similarly be felt from his body. After he arrived, his face showed a perfunctory smile as he glanced at Shu Qing before looking back at Captain Lei. "Newbie. He already knows the rules," Captain Lei slowly spoke. "What is his name?" asked the guy with the three-stroke beard casually. "He's just a brat. How would he have a name?" "Just call him Kid," answered Captain Lei calmly. "Follow me then. Kid, your luck isn't bad. There are already a few people before you. You should be able to fight in one of the matches tomorrow." The guy with the three-stroke beard laughed as he turned and walked toward the wooden sheds. Now Shu Qing looked at Captain Lei. "Go, I will come and fetch you tomorrow." Captain Lei looked at Shu Qing with some anticipation in his eyes. Shu Qing then cast a deep glance at Captain Lei before nodding. He didn't continue to speak and began to follow the guy with the three-stroke beard. When they arrived before the wooden shed, the guy with the three-stroke beard gave a few instructions to the scavengers at the side before turning around to depart. And as for Shu Qing, he was arranged to stay in one of the wooden sheds and was told that he couldn't leave here without getting permission. The moment he stepped into this wooden shed, 4 pairs of eyes from different locations inside the house gathered on him. These eyes belonged to 4 youths whose ages were similar to him. There were 3 guys and 1 girl. 2 of the youths seemed to be a few years older than him. At this moment, their eyes swept over Shu Qing and surveyed him, but they didn't care too much. As for the girl, she was slightly younger than Shu Qing. She cowered in a corner, and a large scar could be seen on her face. She nervously stared at everything in her surroundings warily, including the 3 male youths, as well as Shu Qing, who had just arrived. As for the oldest youth here, he was originally a scavenger, but he changed to another campsite. So, after seeing Shu Qing, his lips curled as he felt some disdain. He then shifted his gaze. His eyes were filled with invasive intent as he stared at the girl while licking his lips. However, he who clearly hadn't obtained the residency right in this campsite didn't dare to be too impudent with his actions. Shu Qing ignored them. He found a location near the door and sat down cross-legged with his eyes closed as he quietly meditated. Time slowly passed. Maybe it was because Shu Qing's arrival was too quiet. Gradually, the 3 male youths in the shed neglected him and began to chat among themselves. 2 of the youths clearly had hints of flattering in their tone when they chatted with the oldest youth. The content of their conversation was mostly about the martial training they had to go through this time around. Through their conversations, Shu Qing knew that this campsite would regularly organize a session of martial training when they had accumulated enough people who wanted to obtain residency rights here. The rules of the martial training were very simple, because the camp leader of this campsite reared many mutated ferocious beasts. The martial training that would allow one to obtain a residency right would simply be a beast fight. The combatants would draw lots and fight against the ferocious beasts they drew. Either they lived or they died to the monsters, becoming prey. Those who were alive could bring back their battle spoils and gain residency rights. Those who died would become food for raising the ferocious beasts, and every martial training would be organized in this place named the Beast Fight Arena. At the same time, most of the scavengers here would purchase tickets to watch this bloody show, and while obtaining satisfaction from it, the camp leader would also start bets to make a profit. In this cruel world, human lives were worthless if one wasn't qualified to enter the city and also couldn't enter the camp. They would have no choice but to live in the wilderness. Their risk of dying would then become even greater. Naturally, going to the slums was a choice, but evidently, those who had chosen to join a scavenger campsite had their own reasons and stories. Shu Qing sat at the side while he listened. When their conversation steered to the god opening its eyes many days ago, one of the youth suddenly asked, "When I came here, I heard people saying that you are the lucky soul survivor from that calamity?" As these words rang out, Shu Qing slowly opened his eyes. When he glanced over, he noticed that the youth wasn't talking about him but the little girl at the corner instead. The girl's body trembled, and she silently nodded. Zhu Qing's gaze landed on the little girl. Everyone only heard about the story, but he had experienced everything. So, he deeply understood that those who could survive in the calamity and arrive here wouldn't be so simple or fragile, even though their appearances indicated that they were so. The little girl seemed to have noticed Shu Qing's gaze. She then lifted her head and looked at Shu Qing. However, Shu Qing closed his eyes again and continued to meditate. He had to grasp all available time to cultivate. This was the only thing he could depend on to live a better life. Just like this, a night passed. The next morning, as the clamor and hooting of the outside world rang out, the door to the wooden shed was opened by someone. Sunlight streamed in. The scavenger who opened the door stood in the doorway, and his figure caused his shadow to be cast into the house, enveloping the figure of the little girl in the corner. This man then coldly spoke, "Pack up and leave with me. The good show you guys are putting up will be shown soon. I've waited long enough." The scavenger youth was the first to rise. He smiled and walked over, greeting the person at the door. The two other youths also hurriedly followed him. Zhu Qing was the fourth person to go out, and the little girl was the last one. The scavenger at the door was acquainted with that scavenger youth. After they chatted for a while, he ignored the others and led the youth to the beast fight arena. The nearer they got, the louder the clamor. Hooting and cheering rose forth in waves, growing in intensity. This lasted until the group of them stepped into the beast fight arena. The moment they did so, the commotion thoroughly erupted. They could see that on the surrounding tall chairs inside the beast fight arena, there were currently over 100 people spectating. Males and females grouped together rowdily as they prepared themselves to watch a good show. Their voices were very loud. Upon seeing this scene, the little girl's body evidently shivered, and the two youths also had pale expressions. The only exception was the scavenger youth, whose eyes gleamed with excitement as he stared at the audience. Next was Zhu Qing. His expression didn't change much, and he started observing the environment of the fighting area inside the beast fight arena. The space isn't very large, so it's unsuitable for kiting. Since there is no cover, it is also unsuitable for hiding. The surrounding wooden fences are very tall, so it's unsuitable to draw the danger to the audience. But there are signs of a few gates. There should be tunnels there. So, either I borrow the cheers and shouts of the audience to frighten the beast, while I find an opportunity to act. But that might end up backfiring as it could cause the ferocious beast to rage, or I end things as swiftly as possible as that would be the most advantageous. While Shu Qing was observing the environment of the fighting area, the sounds of cheering from the crowd echoed out. The entrance, where Shu Qing and the others had walked into earlier, now let out a booming sound as a huge gate slammed down. It smashed heavily against the ground surface, causing clouds of dust and soil to kick up. This sound was like a bugle horn being blown and caused the surrounding scavengers to become even more excited. Shu Qing also noticed that on that tall platform right in front of him, there was a middle-aged man clad in cotton clothes. A group of people followed him, and he sat in the highest seat. Because the distance was very far, his appearance was somewhat blurry. Evidently, the status of this person was extraordinary. Despite the far distance, Zhu Qing could sense that the spirit energy fluctuations from the other party were extremely dense, surpassing everyone he had ever seen before. This caused Zhu Qing to feel wary. At the same time, he had a guess in his heart. This person was probably the camp leader of this campsite. This was because Zhu Qing saw the guy with the three-stroke beard from yesterday bending beside him, carefully giving the latter a report. As the camp leader sat down, the guy with the three-stroke beard stood on a tall platform and made a gesture to those below. Very soon, at the boundary of the beast fight arena, a wooden gate was opened. Now, waves of roars from ferocious beasts sounded even clearer without the obstruction of the wooden gate. And as the sounds echoed out, a group of scavengers emerged. They were split into 4 teams of 3, each carrying a large metal cage as they slowly walked out. Inside each metal cage, a ferocious beast could be seen roaring and prancing around, as though they wanted to tear the cage into pieces. Zhu Qing rapidly glanced over, and his gaze swept past the 4 metal cages. He saw that there were 2 giant wolves, one larger and one smaller. However, both their teeth were extremely sharp. Their bodies were pitch black, and their gazes were blood-colored. There were also large amounts of drool dripping from the corner of their mouths. As they stared at Zhu Qing and the other 4, they revealed savage expressions. There was also a red-furred bear. Its thick arms were even larger than the thigh of an adult human. As for its expression, it was filled with violence as it continued to rattle the cage. The small team of 3 scavengers carrying it evidently found it very strenuous to do so. As for the ferocious beast in the last metal cage, its aura was clearly much weaker in comparison. It was a gibbon. Its body was covered in pustules, which looked like they would explode with a single touch. This was especially so since the gibbon seemed to be in very great pain. It kept slamming itself against the metal cage, causing a number of pustules to keep breaking. It was a shocking sight. Their appearances sent the surrounding audience into another uproar. In just a moment, the expressions of the 2 youths beside Zhu Qing paled. That little girl also had intense terror in her eyes. As for that youth who was originally a scavenger, he was also much more nervous at this moment. Oh, why are there only 4 creatures? Zhu Qing was astonished as he glanced at the tunnel inside the wooden gate. At the moment he looked over, the 4 ferocious beasts in the cages who were struggling and roaring instantly fell silent. It was as though they were intimidated, and at the same time, a gigantic metal cage twice the size of the previous cages was slowly carried out by 6 scavengers from the wooden gate. As the gigantic metal cage appeared, the surrounding audience immediately exclaimed out loud, "Giant horn python!" This time around, the camp leader actually managed to capture a giant horn python. But then again, in his eyes, this python can't be considered valuable at all. To these brats, whoever draws this python will surely die. Even if we encounter it in the wilderness, we will require 2 people to stake their lives before we can kill it. The ferocious beast inside was actually a gigantic python. The thickness of its body was comparable to the waist of a human adult, and the color of its body was a mix between gray and black. If one looked closely at the dark patterns, they looked like jagged mountain peaks. At this moment, it lay motionless in the cage. Its large head then slowly lifted, and its yellow vertical pupils shone with sinister coldness as it looked outside. Under its stare, regardless of the giant wolves or gibbon, they were all trembling. Only the red bear let out a low roar after being provoked. It looked like it didn't mind retaliating, but its body was actually slowly retreating. It retreated until it reached the back end of its metal cage. "Please don't let me draw it. Please don't let me draw it." Behind Zhu Qing, the 2 youths immediately shivered. When the 2 of them were praying in low voices, a sharp glint of light appeared in Zhu Qing's eyes. He knew about giant horned pythons. When he was in the slums, someone had hunted one and dragged the corpse back. At that time, he heard the experienced person saying that the strength of this python was very great. Once something was entangled by it, even giant logs of wood would be snapped. Besides, the python's skin was very thick. However, its body was clumsy, and its speed comparatively couldn't be considered fast. In addition, its gallbladder contained very good medicinal potency. It would cleanse part of the taint in one's body. Also, the snake meat was very nutritious. Read latest chapters on No Bien. Calm. When Zhu Qing thought about this, he recalled that Captain Lei had told him that he liked eating snakes. Zhu Qing had also caught plenty of snakes when he was younger, hence he couldn't help but lick his lips. Also, the mutation point on his body grew darker and darker the more he cultivated. Yesterday, during his cultivation, he faintly felt some piercing pain radiating from it. Zhu Qing was thinking that if he could eat the snake's gallbladder, much of the taint in the mutation point might be neutralized. While he was staring at the giant horned python, the lot drawing started. A scavenger arranged by the guy with the 3-stroke beard carried 5 bamboo sticks with him as he walked over. Each of the bamboo sticks contained the names of the ferocious beast in this martial training session. The oldest youth was the first to draw. When he saw the bamboo stick he drew, he clearly heaved a sigh of relief. After that, it was the 2 other male youths and the little girl. The expressions of the 2 youths were slightly bitter as they prayed while drawing the lots. However, the gaze of the little girl was filled with despair when she looked at the lot she drew. The bamboo slip in her hand was none other than the one that corresponded with the giant horned python. Hence, the last of the 5 bamboo sticks was the smaller wolf. This was also clearly the weakest ferocious beast among the 5. Zhu Qing took that bamboo slip and frowned as he pondered. Very soon the scavenger departed. They, the combatants, were then arranged behind a corner barricade. As the cheering of the surrounding audience rang out, the first match began. The person arranged to make an entrance was one of the 2 youths. He walked out shivering. The ferocious beast set against him was none other than that muscular red bear. The fighting process was very quick. That youth basically wasn't a match for the red bear. After barely clashing a few times, he was overpowered. Eventually, his body was directly torn apart while he was in despair. As a result, fresh blood splattered in 4 directions, causing a commotion in the surroundings. There was also the sound of cursing that was filled with regret. This scene caused the other youth to be so scared that his body shivered unceasingly. He, who was originally supposed to fight in the second round, suddenly shouted loudly that he wanted to give up the match. Hence, under the booing from the crowd, Zhu Qing saw the youth being brought away by the scavengers. As for the youth's ending, it was clear even without thinking about it. The person arranged to go for the 3rd match was the scavenger youth. He had managed to draw the larger black wolf, but his experience as a scavenger made him much more ruthless compared to an ordinary person. After a shocking life-and-death battle, he panted heavily and killed that wolf while suffering many injuries. He became the first case of success in martial training this time around. The gate opened. After that, he clutched his chest and left freely. The 4th match was the little girl. When the cage of the giant horned python was unlocked, the girl shivered and gritted her teeth. She was about to walk past Zhu Qing in despair to fight the battle. But at this moment, Zhu Qing suddenly spoke. "Let us swap." The girl started, but before she could react, Zhu Qing already swapped the bamboo stick he had drawn with her. The moment he took the bamboo stick with the python's name, he no longer bothered with the look of gratitude the girl showed him. He directly walked toward the giant horned python. As he entered, the surrounding scavengers immediately caused an uproar. Evidently, they had seen the sequence of matches earlier. However, other than the gamblers who betted on him and the girl, the other spectators wouldn't care about things like this. They wouldn't care, and neither would the camp leader. Everyone was free to choose their life or death. In the beast fight arena, Zhu Qing calmly moved toward the cage. At the same time, the giant horned python within coldly stared at Zhu Qing as it slowly crawled out, when its thick and muscular body emerged from the metal cage. Its scales caused an ear-piercing grinding sound as they brushed across the metal poles of the cage. Its animalistic instinct felt that this youth before its eyes was different from the prey it usually met. So, after it crawled out, this giant horned python didn't attack immediately. Rather, it coiled its body outside the metal cage and lifted its head high warily, staring at Zhu Qing, who was continuously moving closer to it. This scene caused the surrounding audience to be filled with excitement. The sounds of the commotion also reduced slightly. Zhu Qing's expression was as calm as ever, and he slowly moved nearer step by step. Maybe it was because he had entered the giant horned python's attack range, or maybe because it was provoked by his aura. The yellow vertical pupils of the giant horned python flashed with a cold, murderous intent, and its tail violently slammed against the ground, creating a loud bang. As this explosive sound rang out, its body borrowed the pushing force from the tail and ferociously charged forward. After that, the gigantic snake maw opened wide in the air, revealing malicious sharp fangs and letting out a pungent smell to the air. Its head whooshed through the air, wanting to devour Zhu Qing. Seeing this scene, Zhu Qing narrowed his eyes and coldly watched the giant horned python rapidly charging over. The instant the snake got near, his body dodged to the side. However, he didn't choose to counterattack using this opportunity or care about the large snakehead that passed by him. His gaze only gleamed coldly like a hunter as he attentively observed the belly of this python. From his observation, he saw the python missing its attack and letting out a low roar of annoyance. It then twisted its body, and its tail slammed the ground again, creating the ear-piercing whistling sound as it ferociously lunged at Zhu Qing. Its hunting instincts made the python forcibly turn at this moment. Its head flexed toward its tail as though they were about to join together, forming a circle as it charged at Zhu Qing, wanting to entangle him in its coil. Zhu Qing was silent. His gaze was still closely observing the belly of the giant horned snake. When the snake's tail got close, his right hand suddenly clenched and punched out the instant the tail lashed over. Bang! Although his cultivation of the mountains and seas art was only at the first level, the augmentation it provided Zhu Qing's strength wasn't small. At this moment, when the snake's tail got blasted away, it folded backward directly, unable to coil toward its head. The giant horned python clearly felt some pain, but it wasn't fatal, so it only caused its anger to surge greatly. Its eyes then turned red as its head rammed over, wanting to devour Zhu Qing with a single bite. Zhu Qing focused his eyes as sharpness gleamed within, having found the spot he was looking for. At this moment he strode over, choosing to advance instead of retreating and directly climbing onto the middle section of the giant horned python's body. After that, he exerted force and punched out ruthlessly with his right hand. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches. His punches blasted out. The impact of Zhu Qing's fists made the giant horned python continuously retreat. Its roars grew even more intense as it attempted to coil around Zhu Qing. However, the strength contained within Zhu Qing's punches made it hard for it to coil around. As for the belly part that was being pummeled, due to the scales there being weaker, after several punches, cracks actually appeared and blood seeped out. This was the first time it got injured. After seeing this, Zhu Qing's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he didn't wait for the giant horned python to change its posture. His left hand immediately shot toward the dagger on his thigh. As the dagger glimmered coldly, he plunged it into the flesh of the giant horned python in an incomparably ferocious manner. It instantly broke through the flesh and stabbed inside ruthlessly. As a result, blood splattered around. Amidst the mournful hisses of the giant horned python, a shocking wound was torn through its belly, revealing a whole snake gallbladder. This snake was very large and clearly showed signs of mutation. However, the gallbladder was very small, only the size of an egg. Even so, Zhu Qing didn't hesitate. His right hand stretched into the wound, and he grabbed the gallbladder before pulling it out forcefully. Under the sharp cries of the python, he forcibly took the gallbladder out. Fresh blood then splattered on the sand and soil below. Zhu Qing ignored the bloodstains, and a strange light gleamed in his eyes as he held the gallbladder. Glancing at the surrounding scavengers who had a variety of expressions, he directly placed the gallbladder in his mouth and swallowed it. While he was calmly swallowing it, the giant horned python whose gallbladder was forcibly removed was struggling madly from the pain. Its hisses grew increasingly mournful, and its body was whacking the ground heavily, causing clouds of sand and dust to kick up. It felt like the snake wanted to vent the intense pain it was feeling. After that, its head knocked toward Zhu Qing even more ferociously. Its blood-red eyes now showed a hint of craziness as it widened its maw to the extreme limits as though wanting to swallow Zhu Qing completely. However, Zhu Qing only glared at it icily. The instant the snake got near, he suddenly leaped up and once again evaded the snake's head. He, who was now in midair, brandished his right hand, and the black-colored iron stick appeared. When he lowered his head, killing intent flashed in his eyes. His body heavily landed, and he borrowed the momentum to increase his strength, speed, and body weight to plunge the iron stick ruthlessly with the greatest impact he could muster into the heart area of the python. As a result, The snake scales in that area cracked under Zhu Qing's monstrous strength, and he penetrated the snake's heart with a single blow. An explosive sound echoed out. This giant horned snake's body then trembled intensely like it no longer had the strength to support its body. After that, its head and tail heavily landed on the ground, and its mournful hiss abruptly stopped. Only the weak sounds of its tail thrashing on the ground could be heard. A long time later, when the clouds of dust and soil had settled down, the scavengers spectating this battle were still badly shocked. Many people stood up and stared at the scene in the beast fight arena with heavy expressions. At this moment, the youth was plucking his iron stick out from the snake's corpse. If an adult killed the giant horned python like this, it wouldn't cause them to have such expressions. However, for a small and skinny kid to do all these, the kid had cleanly devoured the snake gallbladder after snatching it forcefully, and killed it in a single blow the next moment, with no changes to his cold expression. In the camp, such a scene was very rarely seen. The smaller wolf and red bear in the cage were evidently frightened as well, and they were both trembling. This wasn't martial training, but a hunt. Under the stares of everyone, the youth put his iron stick away. One of his hands then grabbed onto the wounded part of the giant horned python, and he walked toward the large gate of the beast fight arena. Behind him, the fresh blood of the giant horned python left a red trail behind. It was truly a shocking sight. Standing next to the closed gate, Zhu Qing turned his head and glanced at the high platform. The guy with the three-stroke beard only came back to his senses after some time. After that, he felt some lingering fear as he immediately showed a hand gesture. Very soon later, the huge gate rumbled as it opened. After Zhu Qing exited, he saw Captain Lei with his arms crossed leaning against a wall. Clearly, Captain Lei had waited for a long time. He smiled as he looked at Zhu Qing. "Can I stay at your place now?" Zhu Qing dragged the snake corpse along as he inclined his head and looked at Captain Lei. "You can." Captain Lei smiled. Zhu Qing nodded and tossed the snake corpse over. "Since you like to eat snakes, this is my treat to you." Captain Lei was stunned. After that, he laughed uproariously as he caught hold of the giant horned python's corpse. As he laughed, he brought Zhu Qing along and gradually walked away. Meanwhile, only after they had walked far away did the audience inside the beast fight arena erupt forth with an explosive uproar. Amidst the commotion, in a corner of the crowd, an old man wearing purple robes sat with an expressionless middle-aged man who seemed like a servant. The glabella of the middle-aged man had a 5-point star totem. Regardless of their clothes or demeanor, they were clearly out of place when they sat there. However, no one seemed to be able to see their existence. Even the camp leader's vision couldn't detect their figures at all. The old man had a rosy face, and there seemed to be lightning concealed in his gaze. It felt like everything could be destroyed if he unleashed it. All in all, his entire being was extremely extraordinary. At this moment, he sat there and stared at the departing back of Zhu Qing as he couldn't help but laugh. This youth is pretty interesting. At the scavenger campsite, Captain Lei walked in front while Zhu Qing followed. The sunlight was currently streaming down, landing on them. From afar, despite the sight of one being tall and one being short, one being old and one being young, there was actually a faint sense of harmony. It was as though in this cruel world, such a sense of harmony was very hard to find. Or maybe it was the python corpse in Captain Lei's hand that exuded a sense of threat, causing the passers-by in the surroundings, who hadn't been to the beast fight arena, to not disturb them. Zhu Qing liked this feeling very much. Regardless of whether they were eating the snake later or enjoying the sunlight at this moment, both made him feel very warm. He felt very comfortable and yearned for this. Every time his gaze landed on the python corpse that Captain Lei held, he could feel more saliva in his mouth. He was also fond of eating snakes. Captain Lei's house was located in the center ring region of the campsite. Compared to the brick houses in the inner ring region and the crude tents in the outer ring region, the houses in the center ring region were mostly constructed using stones and wood. In addition, 3 small houses would usually be built in a row together. Although the space within each house wasn't that wide, Zhu Qing could see that it was much better compared to the place he had lived in the slums. This was especially so considering the fact that Captain Lei's house still had a small courtyard. This was even rarer to come by. At this moment, he pushed the bamboo gate leading to the courtyard open. Under Zhu Qing's observation, Captain Lei walked to the secondary room in his house. He then casually pointed to the second tiny house and spoke. "Kid, you can stay here from now on." You should first get yourself familiarized with the surroundings. I will call for you once the meal is cooked." After speaking, Captain Lei began his preparation, and the sound of meat being chopped rang out later. Shu Qing gulped down his saliva. He first observed the tiny courtyard carefully before entering the second house. There was a bed, a quilt, a table, and a chair there. Other than these things, there were no other objects. The ground was very clean. There was also no dust on the table and chair. Evidently, they were often cleaned by someone. Even the quilt was washed until it was very clean. There was the smell of it being dried by the sun. Everything made Shu Qing feel very satisfied. He didn't like a large house. What he liked was a house where he could see everything in one glance, a small house where he could project everything in his mind. This would make him feel safer. Hence, after a meticulous check, Shu Qing looked at the clean bed. He pondered for a moment but didn't go over, choosing to directly sit on the ground instead. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes, beginning today's cultivation. During cultivation, as the spirit energy flowed into him, the sound of oil crackling could be heard from the house next door. Very soon, waves of fragrance flowed through the tiny gaps of stone and wood on the wall and permeated his small house. This also whetted Shu Qing's appetite, causing him to feel a sense of hunger as his stomach produced grumbling noises. It smelled very fragrant. Shu Qing's throat involuntarily moved as he opened his eyes and glanced in the direction of the secondary room. After living for so many years in the slums, he already couldn't remember when was the last time he smelled such fragrance. Hence, he suppressed the hunger in his stomach and closed his eyes to calm himself down before continuing with his cultivation. Just like this, time slowly passed. Very soon, the evening had arrived. When the voice of Captain Lei rang out from outside, asking him to come and eat, Shu Qing, who had just ended a day of cultivation, immediately opened his eyes. He stood up and swiftly exited the house. He then saw Captain Lei standing at the end room, waving his hands to him. Beside Captain Lei, Shu Qing saw that there were 7 to 8 different snake dishes placed on the dining table. Some were deep-fried, some were braised, some were steamed, and there was even snake soup. Evidently, Captain Lei had extremely good cooking skills, and the dishes he prepared were excellent in their tastes, appearances, and smells. Shu Qing's eyes couldn't turn away his gaze after he took a look. Looking at this, Captain Lei laughed and turned to pick up sets of chopsticks and bowls. Shu Qing also moved closer and entered the end room. The fragrance was even thicker here. However, he didn't sit down immediately. Rather, his gaze suddenly froze after he saw Captain Lei placing the sets of chopsticks and bowls. There were 3 sets of chopsticks and bowls. There's someone else? Although the fragrance was very tempting, the appearance of the 3 sets of chopsticks and bowls caused Shu Qing to cast the temptation aside. He cautiously looked at Captain Lei and asked in a soft voice, "You don't have to be nervous. This is a habit of mine. That is for a person who would never come." Captain Lei calmly spoke as recollection flashed in the depths of his eyes. However, that look of recollection soon disappeared, and he sat down on a chair. Latest chapters on Novi Bin Calm. Shu Qing nodded and sat down as well. He couldn't control his urges anymore, and directly took a piece of deep-fried snake meat. He then put it into his mouth and began to chew. It was very hot, but he was also extremely satisfied as he ate it. His mouth was full of grease. After he finished eating one piece, he licked the grease above his mouth and his hands stretched out to grab the braised snake meat. But at this moment, Captain Lei coughed lightly. "Use the chopsticks." "Oh." Shu Qing clumsily took the chopsticks, and after a period of getting used to it, he carried a piece of braised snake meat into his mouth and wolfed it down ravenously. During the entire process of the meal, both didn't speak. It was just that their eating appearances were completely not a match. Captain Lei chewed the meat slowly before he swallowed them, not looking like a scavenger. He only tried 2 to 3 pieces for every dish. As for Shu Qing, he was ravenously wolfing down the meat. His appetite far surpassed Captain Lei's. Seeing how Shu Qing ate, Captain Lei couldn't help but speak. "Why was it so different back then when I gave you the bun? You ate the bun small mouthful by mouthful." Shu Qing forcefully swallowed the piece of snake meat in his mouth. He then lifted his head and looked at Captain Lei as he seriously answered, "The buns belong to you, but this snake meat belongs to me. One was food others treated him to. The other was food he was treating others to." The thinking process of this youth was very simple. Since this belonged to him, he naturally would eat it in a way that perfectly justified the fact. Captain Lei didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He then looked at Shu Qing, who kept picking up pieces of snake meat to eat while also drinking the snake soup. However, he also noticed that the youth didn't eat from every snake dish. He only took meat from the dishes near him, and he also drank the snake soup with restraint. He only ate the portion that belonged to him in such a way. Your python is extremely huge, so it is enough for us to eat for half a month. In addition, its skin and bones have some value as well. So, Captain Lei casually spoke. I will pay you rent. You don't have to deduct the rent from these, Shu Qing suddenly said. The snake meat was to repay Captain Lei for the buns and sleeping bag. The value of the snake's skin and snake bones was to pay back Captain Lei for helping him conceal the matter about Broken Ox. As for Captain Lei bringing him away from the ruins into the campsite, that was a debt of gratitude. Shu Qing felt that it was somewhat inappropriate if he tried to repay the debt by giving material objects. So, he remembered the favor in his heart instead. Captain Lei cast a deep glance at Shu Qing and could see the seriousness in the youth's eyes, as well as his personality of clearly separating grudges and kindness. Hence, he nodded. After he pondered, he spoke again. Kid, you probably had many guesses about my identity when we were on our way here. Shu Qing didn't speak, but his eating action slowed slightly. The others call me Captain Lei. As for my name, it is not important. In the scavenger campsite, no one will use their real name. Captain Lei picked up a piece of steamed snake meat and placed it into his mouth as he slowly chewed. As to why I have this title, it was because, in the scavenger camp, I met a few friends who were willing to share life and death with me. We form a small team, but the name of our small team is a little crude. It's known as Thunder. Usually everyone will accept individual missions. If we encounter a mission with greater difficulty, our team will gather and complete it together. Including me, there are a total of 4 people, but the 3 of them are still out and have yet to return. After they return, I will introduce you to them. In the future, you can follow us and become a new member of Team Thunder. You will then be able to do missions to earn a living as well as cultivation resources. Captain Lei seemed to be somewhat full. He put his chopsticks down and looked at Shu Qing. Shu Qing wasn't surprised by the words cultivation resources. Even Shu Qing could somehow sense that Captain Lei was a rogue cultivator. After having interacted with each other for such a long time, even if Shu Qing was in the body refinement realm, Captain Lei would naturally be able to sense it through his observation. Sure. Shu Qing didn't hesitate as he nodded his head. This caused him to breathe a sigh of relief in his heart. He who grew up in the slums deeply knew that it was impossible for someone to show kindness and offer help while wanting nothing in return. There was a reason for everything. You can continue eating. I'm already old and won't be able to digest the food if I eat too much. Captain Lei coughed a few times, and his face turned a little red. However, he soon recovered. He stood up and walked toward the outside as he spoke. The spirit energy in this world is like poison. If you keep cultivating so assiduously as you did on the way here, your body might not be able to last very long before the mutation overcomes it. Cultivation requires one to build a solid foundation. You must not be hasty. Shu Qing fell silent and didn't speak. The old man who walked to the door turned and looked at Shu Qing as he shook his head. However, by cultivating like this, you are also correct. The scavenger campsite lies beside a forbidden zone, and it is different from the one you were in previously. The items and objects within the forbidden zone cause many low-level rogue cultivators and fugitives to gather here. Since you are staying here, you will surely need to make a trip to the forbidden zone sooner or later. So, cultivating more is also good. Captain Lei then left. Shu Qing sat here alone until he finished all the snake meat. However, he didn't leave immediately. He first cleaned and put the tableware down before he returned to his small house. Upon returning, he sat down cross-legged and continued to cultivate. Shu Qing was very clear that if he didn't want to struggle whilst on death's door and bend his back to survive, leaving the right of his life and death in the hands of others, his own strength would be the root of everything. This was especially so in the scavenger camp. There were plenty of rogue cultivators here, far more than the number he had seen in his 6 years in the slums. Not a single one of these people was a pushover. If the slums were a nest for dogs, this place was a den for wolves. If he didn't work hard, even before he mutated, he might have already died without a burial place because of a conflict or dispute. As for the anomalous substances in his body, Shu Qing learned from the bamboo slip that contained the mountains and seas art that alchemy pills might be able to neutralize them. Although they could only treat the symptoms and not the root, the pills could still be used to cope with mutation. On the way here, he also learned the name of one of such pills from the conversations of the scavengers. The pill was named white pills. In the nearby Forbidden Zone, an important herb necessary for the concoction of white pills was produced there. So, there would surely be people selling white pills inside the campsite. After thinking of this, Shu Qing touched the location of the purple crystal in his chest. During this period, he clearly sensed that, other than granting him a boost in recovery, it also provided a huge increase in his strength and speed. This had something to do with him achieving the first level of the mountains and seas art. However, Zhu Qing felt that his first level seemed to be somewhat different from the introduction of the first level described on the bamboo slip, where he would gain a tiger's worth of strength upon reaching the first level. "I think I can beat many tigers to death," Zhu Qing mused silently as he sensed the spirit energy in his body. On the way here, he had been assiduously cultivating, and he was soon about to break through to the second level. "Today, I will attempt to break through to the second level." Shu Qing's gaze revealed determination. He then closed his eyes and started his breathing exercise. Very soon, spirit energy fluctuations flooded over from all directions. The spirit energy outside Forbidden Zones had much fewer anomalous substances in comparison to the spirit energy within Forbidden Zones, and so it could increase the cultivator's cultivation speed by quite a bit. For this point, Shu Qing had discovered it yesterday when he was in the wooden shed of the beastfight arena. At this moment, he relaxed his body and exerted force to absorb the spirit energy in conjunction with his breathing. There was also a weak flash of purple light from his chest that was covered by the leather coat. Time flowed by. Gradually, light-popping sounds echoed from Shu Qing's body, and his pores began to secrete black-colored impurities once again. The flesh and blood of his entire body seemed to be nourished and became more tenacious. It was like there was a greater strength within them that was gradually bursting out. And at the same time, in the darkness outside, the little girl whose bamboo stick got swapped by Shu Qing walked toward the courtyard Shu Qing was in. She stood there and hesitated. It was like she wanted to knock on the gate, but also felt some trepidation. After a long time, she seemed to have gathered the courage and knocked lightly on the bamboo gate of the courtyard. It was just that the sound of such knocking was too weak. There was basically no way for it to be transmitted within. The moment the little girl knocked on the gate, the popping sounds from Shu Qing's body also reached their most intense moment. As a rumbling sound roared in his mind, Shu Qing opened his eyes. At this moment, purple light flashed in his eyes once again as joy appeared on his face. He then lowered his head and glanced at his arm. The second mutation point had appeared there, the second level of qi condensation. 1. The end room seemed to be connected to the second house where Zhu Qing is staying. Zhu Qing is in the qi condensation realm, but the raws used here was body refinement, might refer to the cultivation art Zhu Qing practiced. The mountains and seas art is said to be one that tempers and refine one's body. You can view the reference from Chapter 6 if you are interested. I've finally broken through. Zhu Qing stood up and punched out, producing a crisp sound echoing through the air. In fact, the blast of wind even caused the door to the house to shake a little. This scene caused Zhu Qing's eyes to open wide. He sensed that the current him was simply much stronger compared to yesterday. If the current him fought against that giant horned snake, Zhu Qing believed that he could blast through the belly scales of the snake with a single punch. Not only that, but his senses were also sharper than before. His vision was clearer, and his hearing also became more sensitive. Hence, the sounds of knocking from outside the courtyard could now drift into Zhu Qing's ears. Zhu Qing started and walked to the side of the house's door. Under the moonlight, he peered through the gap and saw the figure of the little girl standing outside the courtyard's gate. It seemed that she had injuries on her body, and she was trembling slightly. Zhu Qing frowned. He originally didn't want to bother about this, but the girl persisted and continued to knock lightly. Hence, a long time later, Zhu Qing finally pushed the door of the house open and walked out. After seeing Zhu Qing's figure, the girl evidently grew nervous. She bore the impulse to retreat and stared at Zhu Qing through the bamboo gate. "Is something the matter?" Zhu Qing asked. "I also obtained the residency right of the campsite. They also found a job in the campsite." The little stuttered a little as she spoke. Understood. Shu Qing nodded and was about to turn and leave. Wait, thank you. I came here to thank you, said the girl hurriedly. No need to thank me. It was me who wanted to eat the snake. This has nothing to do with you. After Shu Qing finished speaking, he returned to the house. The girl pursed her lips as she looked at Shu Qing's departing back. She suddenly spoke loudly. No matter what, I still have to thank you. This debt of gratitude, I will surely repay you in the future. After she finished speaking, her figure ran away and vanished into the darkness. Shu Qing turned and glanced over, not minding this at all. He then returned to the house and drew in a deep breath, sensing the changes in his body. In his heart, he felt more confident about his thoughts of living a better life. However, the faint, piercing pain that originated from his left arm made him guess that the anomalous substances in his body must have been concentrated to a very high degree. Even the snake gallbladder didn't manage to neutralize much. At this moment, it was in the dead of the night and there were no roars from ferocious beasts outside. Shu Qing then walked to his bedside and saw the clean bedding there before he took another look at his clothes, which were filled with dirt and grime. He pondered a little before removing the clean bedding. After placing it to the side, he lay down on the wooden plank. His hand instinctively grabbed the black-colored iron stick as waves of sleepiness surfaced. This iron stick was the companion he trusted the most, ever since he had found it after searching through the garbage many years ago. He had decided to bring it everywhere with him and use it as his own weapon after discovering how sharp and durable it was. I will search the campsite for a place that sells white pills tomorrow, Shu Qing silently mused as he touched his leather pouch. Inside was his savings of these few years, as well as a few valuable gems he had found inside the city. He didn't dare to take too many gems as he understood the logic of the weak possessing a jade ring becomes a crime. He had seen cases like that when he was younger. As he contemplated, the feeling of sleepiness slowly overcame him, and Shu Qing gradually closed his eyes. It was just that the iron stick in his hand was still clutched tightly, with no sign of relaxation. The calm night passed as the rays of the morning sun cascaded down. The next morning, Shu Qing, who woke up early, had already left the small house. Before he departed, he looked in the direction of Captain Lei's room. The other party wasn't in, so maybe he had gone out. Hence, Shu Qing retracted his gaze and went to wander around the campsite. Maybe it was due to the shock he had caused everyone when he forcibly harvested the gallbladder of the snake yesterday when Shu Qing was walking in the camp. He could clearly feel the gazes of the scavengers in the surroundings. They were somewhat different when they looked at him now. They no longer felt that he was easy to bully because he was young. From this, one could see the evil of human nature. Now, there were more hints of recognition and vigilance. At the same time, the listless gaze of those youths around the same age as him, who were hiding in corners now, had a hint of envy when they looked at him. Dignity was something one had to obtain by themselves. Zhu Qing silently mused in his heart. While he was searching for shops at the campsite, Zhu Qing also familiarized himself with the surroundings. He discovered quite a lot of wild dogs in the camp. They were barking at each other and snatching goods. Most of them were thin, but some looked even more muscular and sturdy than some of the humans. After paying attention to these wild dogs, Zhu Qing continued to observe the campsite. He did so until the map of the campsite was fully created in his mind. According to his mental map, he found a shop in the inner circle area of the campsite. The shop wasn't small, and there were streams of people leaving and entering. This looked like a lively place, and it seemed to sell everything within. Zhu Qing observed it for a while from outside, and noticed the little girl from yesterday with a staff attire in the shop. Clearly, she must be doing miscellaneous jobs here. She seemed very busy, and droplets of sweat covered her forehead. She only noticed Zhu Qing after he walked into the shop. However, just when she was about to speak, she was dragged to the side by a scavenger who wanted to inquire about an item. Zhu Qing didn't immediately pay attention to the things for sale in the shop. Rather, he first took a look at the people in the surroundings who came to shop. There were a total of 7 people. Some were browsing through the items for sale, some had their heads lowered as they contemplated, and some were bargaining. 2 among them, one skinny and one fat, seemed to be part of a group. The fat guy had a rotund figure, while the skinny guy had a horse-like face. Evidently, their attitudes were unyielding, and spirit energy fluctuations that weren't weak radiated from them. One of them was currently scolding the little girl as though he was very unsatisfied with her answers. And as the little girl anxiously apologized, Zhu Qing began to check out the merchandise in the shop. Read. Latest chapters on Novi Bin Calm. Things were the same as what he had guessed. This place was a general goods shop. There were alchemy pills, weapons, clothes, food, etc. They had everything. Hence, he retracted his gaze and walked to the counter. He then calmly spoke as he looked at the shopkeeper, who had an indifferent expression when he smoked a pipe. How are the white pills sold? The white pills are limited, so we only sell 5 of them per day. There are still 2 pills remaining in the quota today. Each pill costs 10 spirit coins. The shopkeeper lifted his brows and swept a glance at Zhu Qing. Maybe it was because he recognized that Zhu Qing was the youth who had fought against the beast yesterday. His attitude was somewhat friendlier. However, after hearing the price, despite Zhu Qing being mentally prepared, he still couldn't help but frown slightly. His savings after these few years were at most 20 to 30 spirit coins. However, the piercing pain from the mutation point on his arm didn't cause him to hesitate. He carefully took out 20 spirit coins from his leather pouch and handed them to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper kept the spirit coins with his right hand and took out a sack from a cabinet, tossing it to Zhu Qing. Zhu Qing grabbed it and opened the sack, revealing 2 white-colored alchemy pills within. However, his brows soon knitted again. Some parts of the surface layer of these 2 alchemy pills had turned greenish. Evidently, this was caused by a change in the quality, and they weren't very fresh. There was also no medicinal fragrance emitting from them. It looked like they were inferior pills. All white pills in the campsite are like this. We don't have any pills with good appearances here. For this item, even if it is rotted, it will still have some effect. You can rest assured and consume them. After the shopkeeper saw Shu Qing's bewilderment, he couldn't help but speak while having an insincere smile on his face. Shu Qing was very cautious, so he didn't consume them immediately. He planned to ask Captain Lei after he returned. Hence, he packed them up and wanted to leave. But at this moment, a gleam of sharpness flashed in his eyes, and his body quickly moved to the side. Almost at the same time as he evaded, a hand landed at the location he had been in previously, grabbing the air. Zhu Qing coldly looked over and saw the scavenger with a horse face, who was previously berating the little girl, standing there with his hand retracted and looking at him with an astonished expression. At the same time, the scavenger with a rotund body stood at the entrance to block the way out as he stared at Shu Qing. He then grinned, revealing yellow teeth. They are Fat Mountain and Horse 4 from the Blood Shadow team. This kid should be someone Captain Lei brought back. Thunder and Blood Shadow have always been against each other, so I won't participate in your matters. However, don't waste too much time as I'm still running a business. The others in the shop also had their attention drawn by the actions of the two. After they looked over, they began to whisper in low voices. The sentence spoken earlier was naturally from the indifferent-looking shopkeeper. At this moment, the pedestrians outside also noticed the commotion here. All of them looked inside with expressions of interest. Don't worry, this won't take long, the guy with a horse face smiled. He then looked at Shu Qing as his eyes gleamed sinisterly. Kid, I've killed plenty of giant horn pythons, so I won't make things difficult for you. I only need the white pills. Give me the 2 white pills you just bought, and I will let you leave here safely. If not, I will help slit your throat and take the white pills from your corpse. These words caused Zhu Qing's gaze to turn even colder. He looked at the other party's neck and the fatty blocking the entrance. Noticing that there were quite a lot of people outside, he started coming up with a plan. The spirit fluctuations from these 2 fellows weren't weak at all. They should be around the 2nd level. He was confident to deal with one of them, as he was sure he could finish the fight in the span of 10 breaths. However, if the 2 of them cooperated, he would also be able to kill them, but it would take longer. In addition, this was the downtown area. Once the fight began, since the other parties were members of a team, they would surely have reinforcement. He didn't wish to put all his hope on praying that Captain Lei would arrive in time. This wasn't his personality. He didn't like putting hope in others, as depending on himself was the best solution. Hence, Shu Qing expressionlessly swept his glance at the neck of the scavenger with a horse face again. His right hand then took out the sack containing the white pills and tossed it over with no hesitation. After the other party caught it, he turned his head back to glance at the fatty before he laughed complacently. His companion, Fat Mountain, also laughed and moved aside from the entrance. After that, Zhu Qing didn't even turn his head and walked out immediately. The surrounding crowds, be it whether they were in the shop or outside, felt that this was very normal. Under the rules where the weak were eaten by the strong, the weak naturally had to know when to bow down. This was the path of survival. The little girl also heaved a sigh of relief. Earlier, she had been sweating profusely. Now that she saw that the crisis had been averted, she continued to busy herself. As for Fat Mountain and Horse 4, they swaggered out of the shop while laughing uproariously as they walked into the distance. It was just that. No one noticed that a figure, which seemed as though it had vanished after walking a great distance away, was following them like a shadow patiently, not exposing itself in the slightest. Its eyes were like a wolf staring at prey, paying close attention to the 2 of them. This figure was none other than Shu Qing. Time flowed and the sky gradually darkened. Fat Mountain and Horse 4 went to many places in the campsite, and even after an entire day had passed, they didn't notice that a figure had been following them from the start. The 2 of them finally separated when the moon was high in the sky. The place Fat Mountain went to had a bonfire, while Horse 4 showed an expression of lust as he headed to the dark area in the outer perimeters of the campsite, planning on entering one of the feathered tents. Just when Horse 4 was about to arrive at the dark area, he suddenly heard the sound of wind gushing behind him. Hence, Horse 4 turned around immediately with vigilance, but there was nothing behind him. He started, and his expression couldn't help but change. It was already too late. An instant later, a small hand shot out beside him, tightly clamping his mouth. At the same time, a sharp dagger sliced forcefully across his throat without hesitation at all. Whoosh, fresh blood spurted all around. As a result, Horse 4's eyes were wide open and he wanted to struggle. However, the small hand that clamped down on his mouth possessed very great strength. Horse 4's body was then dragged backward, and it was futile no matter how much he struggled. His feet could only helplessly tap on the ground, unable to stop him from being dragged into the darkness. Finally, his end was like that of a slain chicken tossed into a corner. Even until now, the small hand clamped on his mouth didn't move away. The owner of the hand waited for a long time. And only after he was sure that Horse 4 had lost all resistance from suffocation and blood loss did he finally relax his hand. He then slammed Horse 4's weak and shivering body onto the ground. Only now did the despairing Horse 4 see the expressionless face of the youth clearly with the aid of the dim moonlight. Woo, woo. Horse 4's gaze contained disbelief. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that the youth who had obediently handed the white pills to him in the morning would be so decisive and ruthless when he acted. He seemed as though he wanted to tell the youth that his words of slitting the youth's throat in the morning had been nothing but a threat. He wouldn't have really killed him. However, the blood gushing out of his throat made it impossible for him to speak. With despair, he could only whimper weakly and looked at the youth who was crouching down and emotionlessly searching through his pockets. When everything was taken out, Zhu Qing found his white pills with an additional 5 more. Other than these, the other party also had some spirit coins and miscellaneous items. After Zhu Qing kept them, as Horse 4's terror reached an extreme limit, Zhu Qing removed the sackcloth covering a snake head carefully and used the snake's fangs to pierce Horse 4's body with great familiarity. As a result, Horse 4's body instantly convulsed and started melting from the location of the wound. The pain and agony from being melted alive caused him to break down mentally. All new stories at NV.com. Only until Zhu Qing lifted his hand and covered Horse 4's eyes did Horse 4's world lose its light forever. His body melted and became blood that seeped into the earth. Zhu Qing had learned his lesson from his previous negligence. At this moment, he took out a prepared pouch and put Horse 4's clothing and items away before he turned to leave. And after he left, 2 figures appeared from the darkness at the location of Horse 4's death. They were none other than the 2 men no one could see yesterday in the beast fight arena. One of them was an extraordinary old man clad in purple, and the other was his servant. The old man lowered his head to look at the pool of blood seeping into the ground before lifting his head to glance at Zhu Qing's back in. The distance. A hint of admiration could be seen in his eyes. This is a good seedling. He has great tolerance and is decisive when it comes to killing. What's even rarer is that although he's ruthless when he acts, he can still handle the aftermath cleanly. Not bad at all, said the old man. The servant who was at the side revealed a surprised expression. He had followed this old man for many years, and it was very rare for him to hear the old man praising others as not bad. In addition, this youth had caught the attention of the old man twice. Hence, he also lifted his head to stare in the direction where Zhu Qing vanished. An interesting little fellow. The old man smiled before casually asking another question. When will Grandmaster Bai arrive again? Old Master 7th, according to Grandmaster Bai's schedule, he should arrive here in 1 or 2 days. The servant withdrew his gaze and respectfully spoke. He's finally going to arrive. This time around, this old man has to properly persuade him. The stupid purple earth is full of stupid rules. What's there to miss? He might as well come and join my 7 blood eyes so he can be more relaxed and carefree. The old man laughed and seemed like he was very happy. He then glanced in the direction Zhu Qing left. Let us go take a look at what this little wolf cub wants to do next. 1. The Lei, in Captain Lei's name, stands for thunder. During March, although spring had returned, the weather was still somewhat chilly. If Zhu Qing had just exited the forbidden zone, the cold wouldn't matter to him. But if he was outside for too long, his body would still feel the bone-chilling cold. This was especially so during the night. The icy chill would feel heavier. As the cold wind gusted by, Zhu Qing's figure didn't stop in the slightest. He merely wrapped his coat tighter around himself. He still had a mission he hadn't completed. Hence, he was carefully making his way through the campsite during the night. On his way, he saw some wild dogs that bared their teeth as they rushed at him. However, after he glared at them, it was like they could sense the smell of blood on him, so they ended up shutting up and hiding away. Zhu Qing's gaze shifted away from the wild dogs as he continued on his way. After he arrived behind a house in the center ring region, He crouched in the dark and remained motionless as he stared at a large house far away. There were signs of an extinguished bonfire there. Shu Qing remembered that Fat Mountain, who separated from Horse 4, had gone there. So he wanted to wait and see if the other party would travel out during the night. The icy chill invaded his body, but Shu Qing's body was as though it had been petrified, remaining completely motionless as he waited patiently. At this moment, behind him, on the rooftop of a building, Old Master 7th and his servant had also followed over. When he saw Shu Qing crouching there, Old Master 7th couldn't help but break into a smile. As per what I expected, this little wolf cub is going to weed out the roots. This old man is now filled with great expectations. If this brat entered the forbidden zone beside our camp, what performance would he show? Old Master 7th squatted down, watching with interest while speaking to the servant beside him. The servant smiled and squatted beside Old Master 7th, also surveying Shu Qing, who was in the distance. Time flowed by, and after seeing an hour had passed, Shu Qing gradually frowned. After thinking about it, he turned and left, walking into the darkness. His entire person was like an apparition, coming and leaving silently. However, he didn't return to Captain Lei's residence, but chose to circle the surroundings for a round. After confirming that no one was following him, Shu Qing headed back to Captain Lei's courtyard and quietly returned to his little house. After entering, he drew in a deep breath and rubbed his hands, wanting to dispel the chill in his body with the aid of this motion. He then wiped away the bloodstains on his body. Only after that did he sit cross-legged on the bed with a look of pondering in his eyes. These scavengers would head out for missions at irregular timing. Luckily, Horse 4 was a horny individual, so as long as not too much time has passed, no one would realize that he is dead. Fat Mountain probably wouldn't be on his guard because of this either. But for the sake of safety, it's best that I get rid of Fat Mountain as fast as possible. Shu Qing narrowed his eyes. Just like how he had killed Broken Ox back then, he who was now in the scavenger campsite wouldn't permit any concealed danger that would threaten his life. He killed Horse 4 because the other party had snatched his item and threatened him. This was also the reason why he was preparing to deal with Fat Mountain. After a period of silence, Shu Qing took out Horse 4's items from the pouch and carefully inspected them. Most were miscellaneous stuff. There was also a palm-sized metal plate that looked ordinary, appearing like an ingredient. Other than these, there were about 70+ spirit coins. To Shu Qing, this was already considered a huge sum of money. He meticulously counted them once before taking out the white pills. After comparing his white pills with Horse 4's white pills, he discovered that these white pills were truly not of good quality and didn't look fresh. Hence, he began to believe 70% of the shop owner's words. After pondering for a while, Shu Qing took out one pill and swallowed it. After that, he closed his eyes to silently sense the effect. Very soon, he felt a current of warmth rising in his body. The current gathered on the mutation point on his left arm, and he began to feel a sense of comfort. The source of this content, NOV-LB. After some time, this feeling disappeared. Shu Qing opened his eyes and immediately looked at his left arm. The two mutation points had grown slightly lighter in color, and the piercing pain was also reduced somewhat. It's effective. Shu Qing revealed joy in his gaze and took out the second pill to consume. The same feeling emerged. As it vanished, the sensation of piercing pain also vanished with it. He felt a sense of coolness in his body. It was very comfortable, as though his flesh and blood were being cleansed. This caused Shu Qing to sense that his speed and strength seemed to be enhanced by a little. As for the remaining white pills, he didn't continue to consume them. He placed them in his leather pouch and began to close his eyes to cultivate. The night was silent. The next morning, Shu Qing opened his eyes and rose to head out. Just when he pushed the house's door open, he saw Captain Lei sitting cross-legged in the courtyard, doing breathing exercises. Shu Qing didn't disturb him. He then opened the courtyard gate softly and carefully closed it before setting off. The wind today seemed even colder than last night. When it blew on someone, they would involuntarily shiver. Even those wild dogs were hiding in their caves, rarely venturing out. When Shu Qing breathed out, he could see mist forming, and this caused his brain to recall some unpleasant memories from when he was in the slums. He hated the cold. To homeless vagrants, the cold wind was like a calamity. One had to forcefully struggle before they could survive. At this moment, Shu Qing, who passed by a clothing shop in the cold, involuntarily halted his steps and glanced at the thick and clean clothes hanging in the shop. He gingerly touched his leather pouch before turning to enter. The shop didn't have many customers. When Shu Qing entered, he cast his gaze on those clothes that were hanging on the wall, looking at them seriously. At the counter, the shopkeeper cast a glance at Shu Qing and wasn't too bothered as he continued instructing his staff at the side. Go and handle things at the back. Take the past month's custom-made clothes that the orderer failed to collect and hang them in front to sell. But what if the person who ordered the custom-made clothes comes back to collect them in the future? The staff hesitated, appearing to be someone new. Come back? There would be people going missing periodically in this campsite. Some died in the Forbidden Zone, and some vanished mysteriously. Only ghosts can return. Quickly go and follow my instructions. The shopkeeper impatiently waved his hands, and the assistant quickly ran into the back hall. Not long later, before Shu Qing had chosen his clothes, the assistant already returned with a large number of clothes in his arms. After he hung them up, Shu Qing immediately had his eyes on a deep-colored inner fur leather jacket. This was something someone custom-made but had no way to return and buy it. After the amount of time it took to finish burning an incense stick, when Shu Qing walked out of the shop, the article of clothing he was wearing was none other than that deep-colored inner fur jacket. This clothing could isolate the cold and wasn't thick or heavy. Moreover, the degree of warmth Shu Qing felt when he wore it was far greater compared to the clothes he had worn before. The only bad thing was that he was too small and skinny, so this jacket looked like an overcoat on him. The sight of it wasn't very matching. However, Shu Qing was very happy. When he was walking on the road, he carefully avoided some places that were slightly dirty. Just when he was about to search for Fat Mountain, he noticed that there were sounds of a clamor from outside of the campsite. Also, many of the scavengers in the campsite walked out at the same time. There was a hint of anticipation in their eyes as they moved in the direction of the sounds. Shu Qing also lifted his head to look over. Gradually, under the sunlight, he saw a group of over 10 horse carriages driving over here in a majestic manner. For those seated there, even the clothing of the guards was incomparably vibrant. Their faces were rosy, and their gazes were sharp. Also, shocking fluctuations of spirit energy could be sensed from them. As for the people inside the carriage, Shu Qing couldn't see any, but he could guess that they were people with very important status. Shu Qing had also heard of such a convoy from Captain Lei before. It seemed that they would come to the campsite often for trading or to purchase the 7-leaf grass used to concoct white pills. Fat Mountain's silhouette also appeared among the crowd, and after Shu Qing's focus was attracted, he no longer paid any attention to the convoy. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and stared at Fat Mountain, starting to follow him secretly. Maybe it was because of the convoy's arrival, but the campsite today was very lively and a bazaar was created. Hence, from the start until now, Shu Qing couldn't find an opportunity. This lasted all the way until late at night. He saw Fat Mountain returning to that big house again. Thus, he could only keep the dagger in his sleeves and turn to leave. Although he had no chance to act today, Shu Qing had plenty of patience. After he returned to the small house, he wore his newly bought clothes and sat down to cultivate. Even when he was asleep, he didn't take off his new clothes. This lasted until the next morning when he was preparing to head out to find opportunities. Only then did he lovingly remove his inner fur jacket, changing back to his tattered coat. Looking at his new clothes, Shu Qing felt that he had been somewhat too impulsive yesterday. At this moment, Shu Qing wore his tattered coat and walked around the campsite. As he passed by a crowded market, his gaze seemed to be surveying the passing carriages, but he was actually searching for Fat Mountain's figure. Far away, Old Master Seventh yawned and was with the servant on a rooftop. His gaze swept past the carriages and turned to Shu Qing. After that, he casually asked the servant beside him, "Have you sent the invitation to Grandmaster Bai?" "Old Master Seventh, I've delivered it, but Grandmaster Bai said that he feels a little unwell recently." "Unwell? Isn't he a doctor?" "He really is." Sigh. "Anyway, I remember that this kid bought new clothes yesterday, but why did he change back to his old ones today?" As Old Master Seventh spoke halfway, he noticed what Shu Qing was wearing, so he couldn't help but be puzzled. While Old Master Seventh was puzzled, Shu Qing locked on to Fat Mountain in the crowd from the corner of his eyes. Just like this, An entire day passed as Shu Qing followed his target. As late night came, Fat Mountain, who originally wanted to return to his residence, suddenly changed his direction for an unknown reason. He actually headed to the outer ring region in the middle of the night. That place was comparatively more remote. Has he discovered me? Shu Qing frowned and narrowed his eyes. His gaze gradually became colder. He didn't continue to follow, but surveyed the surroundings instead. After confirming that the other party was indeed heading there alone, he circled around and continued advancing in the darkness, reaching the outer ring in advance before Fat Mountain did. He ascertained that there were no ambushes here first. His eyes then gleamed with coldness as he hid in the darkness. And at this moment, Fat Mountain also arrived in the area, but his footsteps suddenly stopped. "Brat, I already sent someone following me yesterday. Just come out. This place is very remote and is suitable for burying your corpse. If you don't dare to come out now, I'll no longer be alone next time. Even if Captain Lei protects you, U.S. Blood Shadows will still be able to make you pay a price." Shu Qing's eyes narrowed. The other party had stated it this way, so there was no longer a need to hide. Hence, he walked out of the darkness. Horse 4 didn't secretly accept a mission and head out, right? He must have been killed by you. I have underestimated you. Fat Mountain malevolently laughed and looked at Shu Qing, who walked out. But no worries, I've long since found him unpleasant to my eye. Even if you didn't kill him, I plan to finish him off in our next outing. So, I still have to thank you. Also, I don't care about his life or death, but there's something in his pouch that I want. It should be in your hands now, right? Fat Mountain glanced at the leather pouch at Shu Qing's waist as a hint of greed flashed in his eyes. He didn't wait for Shu Qing to answer. His body shifted as his rotund figure actually erupted forth with a speed that exceeded the second level of qi condensation. The spirit energy fluctuations from him were much stronger than before. In fact, it even formed a layer of airflow around his body, bringing the cold wind along. His entire person was like an ice ball ramming towards Shu Qing. He wasn't at the second level of qi condensation. From the spirit energy fluctuations at this moment, he had reached the third level. It was also precisely because of this, in addition to the item he wanted from Horse 4's pouch, that he decided to come out tonight alone. Shu Qing narrowed his eyes. This was his first time fighting a head-on battle against another cultivator. To make it even worse, the airflow barrier around Fat Mountain's body was something formed by spirit energy. Fortunately, Shu Qing was confident in both his strength and speed. Hence, at the instant the other party came near, Shu Qing also rushed out ferociously. He erupted all his strength and unleashed his maximum speed, causing his movements to leave behind some afterimages. In the blink of an eye, he dodged Fat Mountain. When Fat Mountain was clearly startled, Shu Qing had already arrived behind him. After that, he lifted his right hand and erupted forth with the entirety of his strength in a single punch. This was the first time Shu Qing used all his strength. This punch directly caused thunderous claps and created an explosive boom when it landed on Fat Mountain's body. As a result, Fat Mountain's entire body shuddered immensely. The air barrier formed outside his body then shattered inch by inch as his inner organs churned wildly. 0 LLOWW. New chapters at Nov El Bin Com. Pooh! When the sound of coughing up a mouthful of fresh blood rang out, the killing intent in Shu Qing's eyes grew even more intense. After that, the iron stick appeared in his lifted right hand, and Shu Qing's body swayed as he brushed past Fat Mountain, who was retreating in a hurried manner. The iron stick then followed with the flow and pierced toward Fat Mountain's head. But at the next moment, Shu Qing's expression drastically changed as he decisively retreated with explosive speed. The instant he retreated, Fat Mountain's eyes revealed a hint of ruthlessness. 2 black lines abruptly drilled out from his ears and flew toward Shu Qing's face one after another, producing a whooshing sound through the air. These 2 black lines were none other than winged centipedes. Their speed was extremely fast, and they were about to reach Shu Qing in the blink of an eye. However, Shu Qing slashed out with his dagger using his left hand and directly sliced them apart. The last one was only 7 inches away from Shu Qing's eyes when he finally killed it. This dangerous scene caused the killing intent in Shu Qing's eyes to deepen as he charged over again. During the window of opportunity created when Shu Qing retreated, the churning of Fat Mountain's inner organs also recovered somewhat. At this moment, his rotund body continued to retreat rapidly. His hands performed a set of mudras and his face instantly flushed red. A moment later, he spat out a mouthful of poison mist at Shu Qing. The mist churned with an exceedingly large radius, floating towards Shu Qing. Everywhere the cloud of mist passed by, crackling sounds could be heard. From this, one could see how intense the poison was. After he finished doing all this, Fat Mountain's countenance was pale, and his fat belly got reduced by an entire size. He retreated once more. There was ruthlessness in his gaze along with some lingering fear. Shu Qing's strength had exceeded his expectations. He didn't expect that despite him being at the 3rd level of qi condensation, in addition to his poison attacks, he had actually failed to kill the other party in a single blow. Also, this poison mist was one of his ultimate killing techniques. If he could still do nothing to his opponent, he would have to shout for help and cause Shu Qing to feel trepidation. However, if he shouted for help, it most probably would be very difficult for him to obtain that item of Horse 4. Actually, he still had a taboo item he didn't use. The side effect of using this item was exceedingly great, but he still took it out. It was a piece of amber. As he hesitated in his heart, he glanced at the area that was covered in the poison mist where Shu Qing was in. However, the instant he glanced over, the poison mist suddenly started parting violently in all directions as Shu Qing's figure dashed out from it. His speed was so fast that Fat Mountain felt his eyes being dazzled. His heart pounded, and he wanted to crush the amber with his right hand and shout for help, but sadly, it was already too late. A raven-black iron stick shone with incomparable sharpness and instantly penetrated his head with the ease of a hot knife going through butter. As a result, fresh blood splattered out, landing on Shu Qing at the side. Fat Mountain's body stiffened. He wanted to turn his head but failed to do so. His corpse then slowly fell to the floor and became motionless. Not glancing at Fat Mountain's body, Shu Qing panted as he warily regarded the surroundings with vigilance. This place was a remote location. After ascertaining that he didn't attract any attention, he quickly moved toward Fat Mountain's corpse and took away his leather pouch. Just when he wanted to use the poison fang, Shu Qing suddenly noticed that Fat Mountain's right hand seemed to be holding something. Hence, he pried his fingers open and saw a piece of amber that was half cracked. This item looked ordinary, and there didn't seem to be anything miraculous about this safe for the fact that there was a scorpion tail encased within. Shu Qing carefully kept it. He then melted the corpse and only left speedily after the corpse had turned into a puddle of blood. As he departed, he wiped away the bloodstains on his body and vanished into the night. Old Master 7th and the servant walked out from the darkness at this moment. He then gazed at the location where Shu Qing vanished. Old Master 7th wasn't really concerned about the fight between Shu Qing and Fat Mountain. But after a moment of thought, he revealed a look of sudden realization. I understand why that brat didn't wear his new clothes. He must be afraid that it would be stained by blood. He must have been living in poverty and would feel heartache if the new clothes got stained. The servant who was at the side also breathed a sigh of relief. Throughout this entire day, Old Master 7th had been wondering why this brat refused to wear his new clothes. Right now, there was finally an answer. So, this meant that he didn't need to keep hearing and pondering over the reason why every time. In the darkness of the night, Shu Qing's figure was like a cat. He proceeded forward nimbly and silently, his hand pressed against his mouth occasionally as he forcefully bore with the impulse to cough. During the first few times of this process, it was still tolerable. However, as Shu Qing continued moving, as well as with his many times suppressing the impulse, his lungs gradually felt like burning, and this caused his countenance to become paler and paler. Luckily, this place wasn't far from his residence. Besides, the campsite wasn't very large, so Shu Qing saw Captain Lei's courtyard not too long later. He didn't directly rush in. Instead, he stood at his original location and breathed deeply, trying his best to make himself seem somewhat more normal. Only then did he reduce his speed and proceed forth in a manner that was neither hasty nor slow. He pushed open the courtyard's gate. After that, Shu Qing's gaze swept through the surroundings, and he slowly entered the little house. The instant he entered, Shu Qing couldn't endure it anymore and directly coughed up a mouthful of blood. The blood was black in color, and when it landed on the ground, it actually emitted a sizzling sound. As he coughed up this mouthful of poisoned blood, Zhu Qing's countenance turned somewhat more normal compared to the paleness earlier. He panted heavily and sat down cross-legged as he began to use his breathing technique. It was only a long time later that he opened his eyes. The color of his face had now recovered completely. "What a fierce poison," Zhu Qing mumbled. That breath of poison mist unleashed by Fat Mountain at the end contained extremely high toxicity. However, in that situation, if Zhu Qing had chosen to dodge, the other party would have surely fled immediately while calling for help to attract attention. At that time, things would become much more complicated if he wanted to handle things. Besides, even if he pretended he was injured, it would most probably be very hard to swindle the cunning Fat Mountain. Ever since Fat Mountain sensed he was being followed, everything he did was to mask his intentions. His only miscalculation was his wrong estimation of Zhu Qing's strength. So, at that crucial moment, Zhu Qing had chosen to believe in the recovery prowess brought about by his purple crystal. He forcibly endured the invasion of the poison mist as he decided to push ahead and finish the fight quickly, taking his target's life with a single blow. From the looks of things now, his choice wasn't wrong. The purple crystal indeed possessed a very strong recovery characteristic against the invasion of poison. On his way back, the burning feeling in his lungs and the impulse to cough were actually his recovery prowess taking effect. There are indeed no simple people among scavengers. Most probably, if it wasn't for me being quick enough during my attack on Horse 4 and not giving him time to retaliate, he was going to be very hard to handle as well. Zhu Qing silently mused as he started to analyze the aspects where he was insufficient during these two battles. A long time later, Zhu Qing inhaled deeply and lowered his head to look at his leather pouch. A strange light then gleamed in his eyes. Fat Mountain was moving about alone because he wanted an item from Horse 4. So, he was preparing to counterhunt me and take away the item belonging to Horse 4 from me. Zhu Qing opened his leather pouch and poured everything belonging to Horse 4 out, including the spirit coins. He then arranged the items before him. His gaze swept through the items, and he examined them closely. Ultimately, he eliminated the possibility of all other objects and stared at the metal plate. He frowned and couldn't be sure. In reality, Horse 4's items were all very common. Hence, this metal plate could be considered to be somewhat out of place and unknown when compared to the other items. Is it this item, but there doesn't seem to be anything marvelous about it? Could this be a very valuable ingredient? Zhu Qing pondered as he kept it carefully. He prepared to find a chance in the future to find out about the origin of this item. After that, he took out Fat Mountain's leather pouch and inspected it. There were no white pills inside, but there were plenty of spirit coins. Zhu Qing also found many bottles of poison. However, since he didn't know the art of poison, he didn't dare to carelessly open them. Finally, he took out the amber that was filled with cracks, recalling the appearance of that fatty who was clutching it before he died. What's this item then? It seemed that the fellow was about to crush it before he died. Zhu Qing was puzzled. He felt that he lacked the relevant knowledge, so he put it away after thinking about it. After he finished doing all these, he closed his eyes and continued to cultivate. During these few days, Zhu Qing discovered that after he broke through to the second level of qi condensation, the duration of his sleep didn't need to be as long as in the past. He would be able to regain his energy in just roughly 2 hours of sleep. So, he spent the vast majority of his time immersed in his cultivation. Moreover, because he didn't have any targets he needed to follow today, he cultivated even longer. In fact, he cultivated the whole day. However, when the night just descended, Zhu Qing sensed something, so he opened his eyes and looked outside his house. The moment he glanced over, he heard Captain Lei's voice coming from there. "Kid, come to the courtyard." Upon hearing this, Zhu Qing sat up and silently walked over as he looked at Captain Lei, who was in the courtyard. There was a large table in the courtyard with some meat dishes and wine. Moreover, there were a total of 6 chairs and 6 sets of chopsticks and bowls. Captain Lei was sitting there, and he waved his hands at Zhu Qing when he saw him. When Zhu Qing swept his gaze across the table and sets of tableware, he had a guess in his heart. He then walked over lightly and sat beside Captain Lei. "Have you gotten familiar with the campsite during these few days?" Captain Lei glanced outside the courtyard. His attitude was casual as he spoke to Zhu Qing. "Relatively so," Zhu Qing replied. His gaze then swept past the food on the table. Maybe it was because he had cultivated for an entire day. Or maybe the fragrance of the food was too tempting. Shu Qing soon felt his stomach making grumbling sounds. Captain Lei, who was at the side, laughed when he heard it. "Don't rush, wait for them. Are we waiting for the people from the Thunder Team?" Zhu Qing had long since guessed some things in the past. Hence, he took this opportunity to ask about it. The old man nodded, and just when he was about to speak, he seemed to sense something and turned his gaze outside. At the same time, Shu Qing also sensed the same thing and followed his gaze. Outside the courtyard, in the dim streets, the figure of a burly man appeared. This burly man's muscular figure even surpassed Broken Ox. His entire person was like a small mountain, and the muscles of his body were extremely pumped, emitting a compelling aura. He carried a gigantic finest steel shield on his back and a mace that was even taller than Shu Qing in his hand. He was striding over with large steps.